don't know about you, but there seems to be so many things to feel insecure about at this moment. The political strategist Matthew Taylor has described this moment in history as the age of insecurity. This is the age of COVID, of climate change, of Brexit, and of Black Lives Matter. We're living through this period of incredible social change and things that none of us could have imagined happening now seem quite normal. Like, we dealt with the toilet roll shortage and the petrol shortage, and now we're worried about gas prices soaring and whether we're going to be able to have Christmas turkeys on Christmas Day. And in this age of insecurity, our own insecurities can begin to come to the surface. We can feel insecure about our own place in life and our purpose. We can feel insecure about the future and what the future will hold for us and for our children. We may even feel insecure about our faith. And behind each of these insecurities is fear. Fear that we might be missing out or wasting our life. Fear that things won't turn out the way that we hope. Maybe even fear that ultimately the God that we're putting our trust in will let us down. Well, I've called this talk Secure because I really believe that God does not want us to live our lives feeling insecure. And throughout the Bible, time and time again, we get different images of how God makes us feel secure. God is described as a security guard, a safe house for those in imminent danger, a bird of prey with protective wings to nestle under, a secure shelter which you can run to in a storm, and the one who sends angel armies to surround you. Over the last few weeks, we've been following the life of Abraham. And in today's passage, Abraham is feeling really insecure. And God gives Abraham another image to help him understand just how secure he is. So we're going to read from Genesis chapter 15, verse 1. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your shield, your very great reward. Now, I've never been to war, but I have been to Laser Zone with a bunch of 8-year-olds for Noah's birthday party in Brighton. And if you've never been, you run around these dark, sweaty rooms, literally petrified of getting taken out by small children with light-up guns. And I found that the best technique is to get to the bridge, which is high up. You can look down on other people, but it has these high perspex walls which become like shields to protect you. And then there's always a moment at the end in Laser Zone where the scores are revealed on a big screen for everyone to see. And I've got to say, I was secretly gutted. I was kind of smile on my face. But when I saw how low down that list I was like, how am I so bad at Laser Zone and been taken out by all these other children? But then I thought, I wonder who's won. So I looked to the top of the list. And that was the moment I realised I'm married to an assassin. And as parents picked up their children, they looked suspiciously at Katie, as if to say, who is this grown woman who I left my child looking after? Katie was trying to look very cool about the whole thing, but had a deeply smug look on her face. And God is saying to Abraham in this moment, I am your shield. I'm like an impenetrable barrier between you and the things that you fear. And so how does Abraham respond in this moment? Verse 2, but Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abraham said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Then the word of the Lord came to him, "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is of your own flesh and blood will be your heir." And this is an important question from Abraham. What can you give me, God? I'm still childless. And many years later, the Apostle Paul was reflecting back on this event and reading these very same verses. And he wrote this: "Abraham faced the fact that his body was as good as dead and that Sarah's womb was also dead. Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God." But hang on a minute. With this question to God, it feels like Abraham is wavering in his faith. Well, what I love about Abraham's faith is that rather than keeping his skepticism to himself, he takes it to God. He prays, "Lord, here's the reality of my life. You've made me this promise that I'll father a great nation, but how can I if I can't even father a single child? And Lord, it's not like the biological clock is ticking. I mean, I'm nearly 100 years old and Sarah is in her late 60s. The biological clock ran out of batteries long ago." You see, faith is not the absence of doubts. Faith is persistently bringing the reality of our situation to God. Faith is believing that God is big enough not to be offended by our skepticism. Luke 18 verse 1 says that we should always pray and never give up. And today I would love to encourage you to begin again to ask for the things that he's promised you, to name those promises and the fears that are getting in the way. And this is what Abraham does. He engages with God in prayer. And in that moment, what does God do? Well, he repeats the promise. Look with me at verse 5. God took Abraham outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. He also said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it." Look at the sky, Abraham. Count the stars. So shall your offspring be. I don't know about you, but I find looking at the stars is such a great way to get perspective on my life and the things that I'm facing. And in this moment, God is reminding Abraham of who he is. Don't forget, Abraham, I'm the God who flung the galaxies into space. See how far you can get in counting the 1 billion stars in our galaxy. And if I, the creator of the galaxies, choose to do a work of recreation through you, do you really think that a closed womb will stop me? Well, then Abraham asks God for assurance. He says, "How can I know, Lord?" And it's okay for us to pray this same prayer. It's good to pray that God would give you a deep and settled conviction that his promises for you are true. Of course, you're going to experience fear and skepticism at times, but they're never meant to be the dominating forces in your life. So, in response to Abraham's prayer, God does something which gives Abraham a whole new level of assurance. Verse 9. So the Lord said to him, "Bring me a heifer, a goat and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon." Abraham brought all of these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. And verse 17, when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking brazier with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham and said, to your descendants, I give this land from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. So God instructs Abraham to bring him animals, and Abraham cut the animals in half. He then created this gruesome passageway with one half of each animal on one side and the other half on the other side. And it's like a scene from a horror movie or like a Damien Hirst exhibition. Now, what on earth is going on here? Well, the first people to read this story would have instantly understood what was happening, for this was a covenant ceremony. Nowadays, we talk about cutting a deal, and this phrase originates from the ancient practice of cutting a covenant. A covenant is like a legal contract between two parties. It's a deal in which each party makes commitments to the other. Nowadays, we pay lawyers a lot of money to write contracts between two parties in which the commitments of each party are written down, and the contract contains the penalty for if either party breaks the contract, and they might have to pay a fine. And then each party signs the contract. And sometimes this can be like a ceremony. You bring out your best pen. If it's like a Premier League footballer signing for a new club, the media will turn up. But in a culture in which animals are your most precious commodity, to offer animals as part of this covenant ceremony, you are showing the seriousness of your commitment. And then each party in the covenant would, in a kind of gruesome moment, they would walk through the passageway of dead animals together. And effectively, they were saying to one another, if I break the contract, I will become like one of these animals. The penalty I commit to is death. It's literally like saying to the other person, I swear on my life that I will keep this commitment. So here in this passage, God is saying, how can I demonstrate my commitment to Abraham? And so he begins the process of creating an unbreakable covenant. Now, I'd love you to notice that this covenant was very different than normal covenants of the same time. For in this covenant, there is only one party to the covenant. In verse 17, it said, when the sun had set, a smoking brazier with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. What is going on here? Well, normally you'd expect both parties to walk through the passage of dead animals together. But in this covenant, God is the only one to commit himself. In this covenant, God commits on his life to be true to his promise to Abraham. It requires absolutely nothing from Abraham in return. It's like God is saying, this doesn't depend on you, Abraham. It doesn't depend on your works or how hard you try. I take this solemn oath alone. Abraham has asked God for assurance. And in this moment, God is letting Abraham know that despite his circumstances, Abraham could not be more secure. He's saying, Abraham, this promise I've made to use you to bring huge blessings to the nations, it's not about your performance. It's not like a vision statement for your life that you somehow have to live up to. You're in a strong and secure position, Abraham, not because you're strong, because you're not. I mean, Sarah can't conceive a child. You can't change that. You're in a strong position because I am strong, and I have covenanted myself to you. Therefore, Abraham, don't fear the fragility of your situation, for your purpose and your future are secure. Now, 25 years later, the promise was finally fulfilled. Sarah gave birth to a son, the child of the promise. And we could leave this story as an ancient example of God's extraordinary commitment. But many years after this event, a group of Abraham's descendants reread this account. And it started to dawn on them that God's covenant commitment to Abraham has absolutely huge implications for our lives today. As Paul read this very same passage that we've been reading, and as he reflected on the death of Jesus, he started to join the dots. God wasn't making a theoretical commitment. God said that he was prepared to die to keep his promise to Abraham. Yet at the cross of Jesus, God did die, not because he didn't keep his commitments, but because by becoming a man, he took upon himself the punishment that should have come to us. The cross was a covenant-making ceremony. On the night before he died, Jesus said, "This is my blood of the new covenant for the forgiveness of sins." Jesus is binding himself by his oath to forgive you. The cross means that you can come into a new arrangement with God. Through this new covenant with Jesus, you can have all of your sins, past, present and future, forgiven. You have a new relationship with him. There's some beautiful ancient poetry in the book of Song of Songs which depicts God's passionate love for you. And it says this: "Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death." And Jesus' death says to you, my love for you is stronger than your mistakes and failures. My love for you is stronger than your fears. My love for you is stronger than death. Amen.